Your place is beneath my heel. You're just dirt for us to step on." Those were the final words she heard before his polished shoe pressed down hard on her head, forcing the disabled black girl's face into the manicured grass. She had been tricked into coming to this extravagant outdoor party, lavish tables, champagne flowing, music blasting, hosted by the spoiled sons and daughters of the city's most powerful families. What began as sneers and mockery quickly escalated into deliberate, calculated humiliation meant to shatter her spirit completely. Then, in an instant, the laughter choked off. A deafening crash tore through the air. An armored truck, massive, futuristic, glinting mercilessly in the sunlight, plowed straight through the wrought iron gates as if they didn't exist. The man who stepped out wasn't police. He wasn't anyone they recognized. Who is this mysterious stranger? How does one forgotten girl in a wheelchair ignite a fire that could burn down the most untouchable family in the city? If you've ever wanted to watch arrogant power finally brought to its knees, don't look away. What comes next will leave you speechless.
The rubber tires of the wheelchair hummed a lonely rhythm against the cracked asphalt of the McKinley High Stadium track. For Alyssa Monroe, that sound had become the pulse of her life, steady, mechanical, and isolating. She pushed the metal rims with calloused hands, her muscles straining against the resistance. Around her, the world ran on two legs, sprinting, leaping, living freely. But Alyssa only rolled. 16 years old, black, and invisible unless someone needed a target. On the field, the varsity football team sprawled across the grass like lions at rest, confident, territorial, untouchable. Their red and gold jerseys gleamed under the sun, symbols of privilege in a world that cheered for them no matter what they did. At the center stood Gavin Whitlock, quarterback, golden boy, son of Mayor Sterling Whitlock. His face was the kind people trusted without reason, all symmetry and sunlight, a halo of blonde hair that lied about his nature. Alyssa kept her head down, trying to cross the track unnoticed toward the library annex. She knew the rules of survival here. Don't make eye contact, don't draw attention, don't exist more than necessary. Then came the shout, "Heads up!" It wasn't a warning, it was a command. Alyssa lifted her head just as the air split open. A football spun toward her, fast, precise, and deliberate. It hit the side of her head with a brutal thud. The impact sent her body pitching sideways. The wheelchair tilted, balanced for a heartbeat, then slammed down hard. Pain burst behind her eyes. She pressed trembling fingers to her temple, feeling the bruise swell under her skin. Then came the laughter, loud, unrestrained, cruel. The sound wasn't confusion or apology, it was celebration. Gavin Whitlock jogged toward her, lazy and amused, his movements too casual for an accident. His teammates followed like obedient shadows. "My bad," he said, "slat me," voice hollow. He stopped in front of her, blocking the sun. Alyssa prinked against the glare, tears stinging her eyes. When she looked up, she saw no guilt, only pleasure. He'd done this on purpose. "You aimed at me," she whispered. Gavin smiled faintly. "Don't flatter yourself," he said, picking up the ball. "You were just in the way." He leaned closer, and the air thickened between them, heavy with an old hatred that had been waiting years for this moment. 10 years earlier, 2 cars had collided on a rain-slick highway. In one sat Marianne Whitlock, the mayor's wife. In the other, Elias Monroe, a mechanic, with little Alyssa asleep in the back seat. The police report claimed Elias had drifted across the center line. It called him negligent. It called him a killer. The crash killed Marianne instantly, shattered Alyssa's spine, and condemned her father to die 2 years later in prison, a broken man carrying a false guilt. The town accepted the story because it was easy, because the powerful said it was true. But Gavin had never let the story go. To him, Alyssa wasn't a girl. She was a ghost that refused to vanish, a reminder of everything his family lost. Every squeak of her wheelchair was a funeral hymn. Every glance at her face replayed the crash his mind could never escape.
His grief had rotted into obsession. He didn't just bully her, he punished her for surviving. "You're blocking the track," he said coldly, and kicked the wheel of her chair. The jolt rattled through her body, awakening the phantom pain in her useless legs. "I'm leaving," Alyssa said, gripping the rims. "Are you?" Gavin stepped in front of her, planting his cleats like stakes in the asphalt. He loomed above her, casting a long shadow. "My dad says it's a miracle you survived," he smiled without warmth. "He calls it divine intervention." He paused, letting the silence twist. "I call it a mistake." The words hit harder than the football. The players shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. Their silence gave him permission. Alicia's hands trembled on the rims. She wanted to shout that her father had been innocent, that he sworn until his dying breath that the other car had swerved into him. But who would believe the daughter of a convict over the son of a mayor? "Let me pass, Gavin," she said softly. He crouched closer, peppermint on his breath, a sweetness meant to hide the rot beneath. "You think that chair makes you special," he whispered. "You think you're a victim. You're a stain, Alyssa. You shouldn't exist." His eyes narrowed. "And this week, I'm going to fix that." Alyssa turned away, forcing her hands to move, forcing her wheels to spin. Her heartbeat thundered in her chest. She rolled faster, the laughter of the team echoing behind her like a chant. She didn't look back. The farther she moved from the field, the louder her pulse grew, until it drowned everything else. Fear, pain, and humiliation collapsing into one long, shaking breath. High in the bleachers, a man watched. He sat still in the shadow of the press box, a gray coat over broad shoulders, a flat cap pulled low across a scarred face. A folded newspaper rested in his hands, unread. His eyes stayed fixed on Gavin Whitlock. The man's name was Dorian the Hammer Blackwell, a soldier turned ghost, a man who'd seen too many wars to mistake bullies for men. His face was a map of hard years, the lines etched deep by violence and regret. In his eyes simmered something cold and deliberate, the kind of patience that comes before a storm. He watched Alyssa disappear behind the school building, then turned back to the field. Gavin was laughing again, high-fiving his teammates, basking in his power like a young king. Dorian folded the newspaper slowly, the sound crisp in the quiet air. He rose to his feet. There was nothing righteous in his expression, only resolve. He didn't look like a savior. He looked like a man who'd already chosen a side. "Not for long, boy," he murmured low and steady. The wind carried his words across the empty bleachers. As the afternoon sun slid lower, the field shimmered with heat. From a distance, the boys in red and gold looked like heroes, but beneath the glare, shadows began to lengthen, stretching, reaching, swallowing the edges of their kingdom. In that darkness, justice was stirring. It didn't move fast, it didn't roar, but it was coming, slow, certain, and inevitable. By the time Gavin turned to grab his helmet, the gray-coated man was already gone. Only the newspaper remained on the bleachers, fluttering in the wind like a warning. On its front page, the headline read, "Mayor's Office Faces New Scrutiny Over Decade-Old Crash." Down on the track, the faint trail of wheelchair treads marked the path Alyssa had taken, a fragile but undeniable signature. She had no idea that someone had been watching, no idea that her story, buried under a decade of lies, was about to claw its way back into the light. For now, she only knew the ache in her arms, the ringing in her ears, the taste of dust in her throat. But somewhere in that ache was something new, a flicker of defiance, tiny and alive, the kind that turns survival into resistance. And in the distance, where the wind carried the last echo of Dorian Blackwell's promise, the quiet machinery of justice began to move. Miss Victoria Larkspur's office smelled like vanilla candles and deception. Everything in the room was curated to perform safety. Soft lighting, framed inspirational quotes, a bowl of peppermint mints that never ran out. Warmth by interior design, comfort as camouflage. But to Alyssa Monroe, the space felt like a coffin lined with velvet, pretty, padded, and built to keep you quiet. Alyssa sat in her wheelchair at the center of the room like an inconvenient fact nobody wanted to print. Her hands were folded tight in her lap to hide the tremor. Her head still throbbed where the football had struck her. She looked up at the woman the school adored, the beloved history teacher with the polished smile, the practiced eyes, the reputation that could turn cruelty into misunderstanding with a single sentence. Victoria sat across from her, 40-ish and meticulously maintained, the kind of person who treated aging like an enemy state. She tilted her head at the exact angle that suggested empathy without ever risking it. "Drink some water, Alyssa," she said softly, sliding a paper cup across the desk like a peace offering. "You look flushed." Alyssa didn't touch it. "He threw the ball at my head," she said, voice steady even as her pulse rattled behind her ribs. "On purpose. And then he told me I shouldn't exist. He said he was going to correct the error of my survival." Victoria sighed, delicate, airy, almost theatrical. She picked up a silver pen and tapped it against her notepad in a slow rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. Not a single word was written down. "Those are very serious accusations," Victoria murmured, sweetness laid on thick like frosting over rot. "Are you absolutely certain that's what happened? Sometimes when we're startled, when we're in pain, our minds can fill in gaps. We hear what we fear, not what was said." Alyssa's jaw tightened. "I know what I heard and I know what he did." The sentence came out clean. It cost her something anyway. "I want to file a formal harassment report against Gavin Whitlock." The entire team laughed. The pen stopped. The warmth in Victoria's eyes thinned by 1 degree, just enough for the mask to slip and reveal the mechanism underneath. She leaned forward, hands clasped as if she were about to pray. "Alyssa," she said softly, "look at me. We all know the history here. We all know the tragedy that links your family to Gavin's." Alyssa stiffened. "That has nothing to do with him assaulting me today." "It has everything to do with it," Victoria corrected gently, like she was teaching a lesson. "Gavin is a young man carrying a mountain of grief. He lost his mother in that crash, a crash caused by your father, Elias Monroe. When he looks at you, he sees the worst day of his life." The room didn't just smell like vanilla now. It smelled like rewriting, like editing someone else's pain until it fit the town's preferred narrative. "Can you really blame him," Victoria added, "for a moment of emotional outburst?" It was a masterclass in turning the knife and calling it compassion. Alyssa had walked in as the injured one. In Victoria's version, Alyssa was the trigger, the walking reminder, the reason the golden boy couldn't help himself. He hit me with a football. He threatened me." "He's a teenage boy," Victoria said, waving a hand as if swatting away a fly. "They play rough. It was likely a bad throw, and his words were bluster. You know how boys talk when they're showing off." Alyssa stared at her. The disbelief burned hotter than the bruise. "So that's it? That's what this is?" Victoria's voice softened again. Not kinder, just quieter, more dangerous. "Alyssa, Gavin has a bright future. He's the captain. Scouts are coming. A report like this could follow him. It could ruin his transcript. It could destroy his entire life over a misunderstanding." "What about my life?" Alyssa asked. The question sat in the air like smoke, heavy, unwelcome, unanswered. Victoria rose and stepped around the desk, moving close the way predators do when they're pretending to comfort you. She placed a hand on Alyssa's shoulder. The touch felt cold, rehearsed, almost reptilian, pressure without care. "You need to be so sensitive," she whispered. "You carry a chip on your shoulder because of your condition. I understand life is hard for you, but trying to tear down a golden boy like Gavin won't change anything." Her mouth curved into something that almost looked like a smile. "It won't make your legs work again. It will only make you enemies." Alyssa pulled away sharply. In that moment, something inside her clicked into place with brutal clarity. This room was not a sanctuary, it was a checkpoint. Victoria wasn't protecting students, she was protecting power, polishing it, defending it, feeding it. "I want the report form," Elissa said. Victoria's smile went thin. "I think you should go home and rest. We will not be filing paperwork today. I'll speak with Gavin about being more careful during practice." Her tone sharpened on the last line, the velvet glove slipping to show the steel underneath. "And, Elissa, do not spread these lies around school. Slander is a punishable offense." Elissa turned her wheelchair toward the hallway. She didn't give Victoria the satisfaction of another argument. She rolled out in silence, her hands steady now, not because she felt calm, but because rage can do that. Rage can straighten the spine the world tried to break. Rage can turn trembling into traction. Halfway down the hall, Elissa realized the system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as designed. It was built to protect the Whitlocks of the world and crash the Monroes. Inside the office, Victoria watched Elissa disappear around the corner. She waited an extra beat, then closed the door and clicked the lock. The concerned teacher mask vanished like a stage light going dark. Her face hardened into clean calculation. She returned to her desk, picked up her personal phone, and dialed a number that wasn't in any school directory. The call connected almost instantly. "What?" a deep voice answered, impatient and authoritative. "Mayor Whitlock," Victoria purred, intimacy sliding into her tone like perfume. "It's Victoria. We have a problem." On the other end, Mayor Sterling Whitlock didn't bother with greetings. What did she meant? "She tried to file a formal assault report against Gavin," Victoria said, voice calm, almost amused. She picked up a framed faculty photo and traced her own face with one manicured nail. "She claimed he hit her with a football and threatened her." "And?" the mayor demanded. "I shut it down. I told her she was confused. I warned her about slander. She left." "Good," the mayor grunted. Then, with the annoyance of a man used to controlling outcomes, "Gavin is reckless. I told him to keep his head down until the election is over. He's becoming a liability." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "He is sloppy," she said, letting a sharper edge cut through the sweetness. "If she'd gone to the police instead of me, we'd be having a very different conversation. I can only clean up so much." There was a pause, not hesitation, just dominance taking shape. "You'll clean up whatever I tell you to clean up," the mayor snapped. "Remember who put you in that department head chair, and remember who can put you in the principal's office next semester, if you keep me happy." Victoria smiled at the phone, not a friendly smile, the smile of a predator recognizing another predator. Ambition was the only language they both spoke fluently. "I want that office," she said quietly. "Make sure the board is ready. Handle the girl, and tell my son to be smarter." The line went dead. Victoria set the phone down and checked her reflection in the darkened window. She smoothed a stray hair as if adjusting a crown. No guilt, no doubt, only the warm, intoxicating certainty of influence. She opened her messages and selected Gavin's contact. Her fingers moved fast. "Gavin, she just tried to report you. I killed it, but she's stubborn. Stop doing anything stupid where people can see. Send." Delivered. Outside, Elissa rolled down the hallway with a bruise blooming on her head and a fire glooming in her chest. The school's walls were the same. The smiles were the same. But Elissa wasn't. Because now she knew the truth, and truth has a funny habit. It doesn't stay buried forever.
The next day, the cafeteria at McKinley High became a theater of the absurd, a place where silence met spectacle. The usual chaos of trays and laughter didn't fade, it stopped. A hush spread outward from the center of the room until every table seemed to lean in. Elissa Monroe sat at her usual exile near the garbage bins, picking at her sandwich like it tasted of nothing. She felt the room's attention slide toward her in a single, coordinated motion.
Her hands tightened around her wheels, bracing for the familiar pattern, a joke, a shove, something accidental. Her body knew the rule. When the room goes quiet, someone is about to be offered up. Gavin Whitlock stood in the middle of the cafeteria as if it belonged to him. Yesterday, he had been a predator in cleats. Today, he wore humility like a tailored suit. Relaxed shoulders, open face, hands raised in calm surrender, the universal signal of safety performed by someone who had never earned it. "Everyone listen up," Gavin said, his voice smooth enough to reach the back wall. He walked toward Alyssa with measured steps, no swagger, no rush, stopping a few feet away, the perfect distance for optics. "Allie," he said softly, meeting her eyes. The malice from yesterday was gone, replaced by regret so convincing it could have sold forgiveness to strangers. "I want to apologize." Alyssa's heart pounded as she waited for the trick, the laugh, the snap of the trap. But Gavin kept going, turning slightly so the crowd could see his face. "I was out of line yesterday," he said. "I let my temper get the best of me. The accident, the past, it messes with my head sometimes. But that's no excuse. You didn't ask for any of this." A murmur rippled through the room as people leaned forward, hungry. Redemption was entertaining. Accountability was not. Gavin reached into his pocket and pulled out a cream-colored envelope, thick cardstock, gold lettering, wealth pressed into paper. He placed it gently on Alyssa's tray like a peace offering. "My birthday is this weekend," he said. "I'm throwing a party at my house. Everyone's coming, and I want you there." Alyssa stared at the envelope. It didn't belong on her table. "Why?" she asked. "Because I want to bury the hatchet," Gavin said, smiling with that soft, harmless look that hides teeth. "We've hated each other for 10 years because of our dads. It's time to stop. Come to the party. Let's start over." The cafeteria exploded into applause, not for Alyssa, for him. The sound washed over her, drowning the warning bells in her chest. They cheered Gavin's maturity, his growth, the end of a feud, the performance. In that moment, the cafeteria wasn't a lunchroom, it was a courtroom, and the verdict was already written. Alyssa looked at the envelope, then back at Gavin. Something desperate tightened in her throat. For 10 years, she had been the outcast. For 10 years, she had wanted the simplest thing, to belong, to be seen as a person instead of a tragedy. The bait wasn't the party. The bait was belonging. "Okay," Alyssa whispered. "Great," Gavin said, and for a split second, so fast it barely existed, his eyes flashed cold, triumphant. "Wear something nice," he added. "It'll be a night to remember." That afternoon, sunlight stretched long shadows across the driveway of a small, weathered house. The garage door stood open, spilling the smell of oil and metal into the street. Inside, the stripped skeleton of a 1969 Mustang rested like a patient waiting to be revived. Dorian the Hammer Blackwell slid out from underneath the chassis when he heard the familiar hum of Alyssa's wheelchair. He wiped grease from his hands and studied her face. "You look like you saw a ghost," he said. She stopped at the edge of the garage, the envelope resting in her lap. "He invited me." "Who?" Dorian frowned. "Gavin. To his birthday party. Tonight." Dorian stood slowly, took the envelope from her lap, inspecting it like an explosive. "He hit you with a football yesterday. Told you you shouldn't exist. Today he wants cake by his pool." He lowered the envelope. "Does that add up to you?" "He apologized, though the words felt thin, in front of everyone. He said he wants to start over." Dorian scoffed. "Wolves don't turn into dogs overnight. They just learn to wear sheepskin." His eyes hardened. "This is a setup. You're walking into a kill box." "You don't know that," Alyssa snapped, defending the fragile hope she needed to breathe. "Maybe he grew up. Maybe he's tired of the hate. I can't live like this anymore. I'm alone." Her voice cracked. "If there's even a 1% chance this is real, I have to try." Dorian looked at her.
and saw the hunger underneath, the kind that makes poison look like water. He'd known her father, Elias Monroe. He'd made promises once. "Desperation is a dangerous guide," he said quietly. "It makes you drink poison because you're dying of thirst." "I'm going," Alyssa said finally, slipping the envelope into her bag. "I need this to be true." Dorian knew he couldn't stop her. She had her father's stubborn spine. "Keep your phone on," he said. "If anything feels wrong, you call me any time." "I will," she said, and rolled away toward her empty house. Dorian watched her go, a heavy cold settling in his gut. He turned back into the garage, moved Mustang parts aside, and unlocked a steel case hidden beneath the bench. Inside waited a satellite phone and a tactical earpiece, relics from a life he had buried. "I hope you're right," he muttered, "but I'll be ready if you're wrong." That evening, Alyssa sat before her mirror, wearing a blue silk dress saved for an occasion that never came. She curled her hair, added gloss, and for a moment didn't see the chair first. She saw a young woman. She saw beauty. She imagined laughter, conversation, Gavin smiling without cruelty, a life where she wasn't the town's old wound. At 7, the accessible van honked outside. Alyssa smoothed her dress, grabbed her clutch, and whispered a prayer to the quiet room. "Please let this be real." She rolled out of her house and into the van, bound for the Whitlock estate, dressed in blue, wrapped in hope, believing that maybe just once the world might make room for her. She didn't know she was stepping onto a stage built by predators, and she didn't know the applause was never for her.
The Whitlock estate was not a home. It was a fortress of limestone and glass planted into the hills to remind the countryside who owned it. The accessible van idled at the foot of the long, winding driveway, hazard lights blinking against the twilight like a warning no one heeded. Bass thudded from somewhere beyond the trees, rattling the van's frame, while colored lights pulsed into the sky, a private inferno announcing that money was celebrating itself. The driver glanced back at Alyssa Monroe, the same gentle man who had secured her straps with careful hands. "You sure about this, miss?" he asked. "Looks rowdy." Alyssa looked past him at the sprawl of cars littering the lawn, Porsches, BMWs, lifted trucks, parked with the careless confidence of wealth that never expects consequences. "I'm sure," she said, though her stomach felt like broken glass. "I was invited." The ramp whirred down. Her wheels touched the pavement. The van pulled away, leaving her alone at the foot of the castle. Alyssa smoothed her blue silk dress and checked her reflection in the dark window of a parked Mercedes. She looked beautiful. She looked hopeful. She rolled forward, navigating around discarded red cups and couples pressed against hoods, following the noise toward the back of the house and telling herself this was how belonging sounded, loud, imperfect, alive. She rounded the corner and stopped. The backyard was a tableau of decadent excess. An infinity pool glowed turquoise like a promise with teeth. A DJ booth throbbed on the patio. Waiters in white tuxedos threaded through a crowd of teenagers already drunk on vodka and power, trays of champagne floating like offerings. The air smelled of chlorine, citrus, and entitlement. Alyssa rolled onto the patio and waited for Gavin Whitlock, for an apology, for the moment the night would prove her right. No one noticed her. No one smiled. The music didn't stop, but the air shifted. Heads turned. Whispers rippled like a sickness. Fingers pointed. "Why is she here? Who invited to help?" Alyssa clutched her bag until her knuckles ached. The realization landed heavy. There was no reconciliation, no banner, no welcome. She wasn't a guest. She was a prop wheeled onto a stage. Well, well, well. The crowd parted, and Gavin Whitlock emerged, tequila bottle dangling from one hand, shirtless, designer trunks, skin slick with sweat and oil. He looked like a golden idol worshipped by fools. "The guest of honor arrives," he slurred, grin stretching too wide, eyes already calculating.
"Happy birthday," Alyssa said, her voice swallowed by the bass. She held out the small gift bag she'd brought, polite, hopeful, something to anchor the moment in decency. Gavin laughed and slapped it from her hand. It skidded across wet concrete. A bottle shattered inside. Cheap musk bloomed into chlorine, sharp and embarrassing. "I don't want your charity trash," he said, signaling the DJ. The music dropped lower, an ominous heartbeat that seemed to sync with Alyssa's pulse. "Guys," shouted Gavin, "Alyssa's here. Let's welcome her. Truth or dare." Cheers erupted, the same pack from the field, now soaked in alcohol. They closed in, perfect teeth, empty eyes, forming a tight ring that pinned her chair at the center. Alyssa tried to back up. A boy in a polo blocked her wheels with his foot, smiling like it was a gain. "I want to go home," Alyssa said, panic scraping her throat. "You just got here," Gavin cooed. "Don't be rude. Truth or dare?" She didn't answer. "I'll pick," he said, enjoying the power. "Dare." He grabbed a red cup, filled it to the brim with tequila. "Drink," he ordered. "To my health, to my mother." The crowd leaned in, phones lifted, stories cued themselves in real time. "I don't drink. Drink." The chant rose. "Drink, drink, drink." Gavin seized the back of her head, fingers tangling in her hair, and forced the cup to her lips. The burn flooded her mouth. She gagged, coughing, half of it spilling onto her dress. Blue silk darkened and stained, the fabric surrendering like her hope. "Messy," a girl giggled. "She can't even hold her liquor." Alyssa gasped for air. "Please stop." Her voice barely existed. "Now for the truth," Gavin said, tossing the cup aside. He crouched in front of her and stared at her legs beneath sheer stockings, eyes bright with cruelty. "Is it true?" he whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. "You can't feel anything?" He pinched her thigh hard, twisted the skin. Alyssa flinched from the sight. Her legs stayed still. "Dead weight," marveled Gavin. "Nothing like meat." "Leave her alone," someone muttered from the back, a thread of decency trying to breathe. "Shut up," Gavin snapped without looking away. His gaze returned to Alyssa, darkening into something older and uglier than cruelty. "My dad says it's fitting," he said. "God took your legs to keep you in your place. People like you aren't meant to stand. You're meant to be down low, serving, cleaning, rotting." He used slurs then, words that stripped her down to skin, poverty, disability, spoken with the confidence of a boy who knew the law would never touch him because his father was the law. The crowd laughed, and some of the older faces at the edges went quiet. A few parents shifted, eyes darting, calculating risk versus reputation. This wasn't mischief. This was a hate crime dressed as a party. Alyssa sat frozen. Tears came hot and humiliating. Faces she'd known since kindergarten stared back like a sideshow curiosity. Her dress was ruined. Her dignity was gone. Dorian Blackwell had been right. She had walked into a kill box. Gavin stood and wiped his hands on his trunks as if he'd touched something filthy. He turned toward the DJ and raised a hand. Cut the music. The bass died. Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. Pool water lapped softly. Alyssa's breathing tore the quiet apart, each breath a small, desperate theft of air. Gavin faced the crowd. His smile was gone. His eyes were empty. "The warm-up's over," he announced, voice echoing off stone. Phone steadied. The ring tightened. Alyssa's mind searched for exits that didn't exist. She thought of Dorian's garage, the smell of oil and safety. She thought of the Mustang's ribs, how broken things could be rebuilt if someone bothered to try. She reached for her phone with shaking fingers and felt a hand slap it away, skidding across the patio. "Don't," Gavin said softly. "No spoilers." The crowd murmured, a tide pressing inward. Somewhere beyond the walls, the countryside slept, unaware. Somewhere beyond the hills, consequences waited patiently, like weather. Alyssa lifted her chin, blurring lights into halos that lied. She refused to look down. She refused to disappear.
Gavin stepped closer, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret meant only for her. "This is how it works," he said. "You show up when we invite you. You leave when we're done." He straightened, turning back to the crowd. "Everybody ready?" Alyssa closed her eyes and breathed. Not a prayer, a promise to remember every face, every laugh, every word, to survive long enough to tell the truth. The pool lights flickered, the night held its breath, and somewhere, far from the fortress, a locked steel case waited to be opened.
Gavin Whitlock stood over Alyssa Monroe. The tequila bottle dangled from his hand like a weapon he hadn't yet decided how to use. He stared down at her wheelchair, her lifeline, her legs, her freedom, with idle, calculated curiosity. "You know," he said, his voice echoing off the glass walls of the villa, "I'm tired of standing. I think I want to sit down." The words sounded casual. What followed did not. He lunged and clamped his hands around the wheelchair's handles. "Get out," he commanded. Alyssa didn't have time to brace, didn't have time to grab the armrests. He yanked the chair backward and wrenched it sideways. Gravity finished the sentence. Alyssa fell, slamming into the hard, wet concrete. The impact stole the air from her lungs and sent a dull, nauseating vibration up her spine, settling there like a warning hum. Her hands scraped against the rough stone as she tried to steady herself. The blue silk dress, already stained with tequila, soaked up pool water and clung to her like a second, heavier skin. She lay exposed, staring up into a ring of faces. They weren't horrified. They were entertained. Smartphones lifted like votive candles, flashes strobing as they recorded her humiliation for later replay. Gavin dropped into her empty wheelchair and spun in a tight circle, laughing. He slunked his body, let his head loll, clawed at the air, performing a grotesque parody of disability. "Look at me," he shouted, wheeling recklessly around her prone body. "I'm Alyssa. I'm so sad. Give me a scholarship because I can't walk. Boo-hoo." The crowd erupted, laughter tearing through the night and stripping it of whatever decency it pretended to have. Alyssa pushed up onto her elbows. The humiliation burned hotter than the scrapes on her arms. She looked at Gavin, this golden boy, this mayor's son, this thing wearing a smile, and something inside her finally snapped. The fear that had ruled her life for 10 years evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. "You're pathetic," she said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Gavin stopped the chair and turned to face her, surprise flickering before anger rushed in. "What did you say?" Alyssa dragged herself upright and met his eyes, empty, entitled blue. "I said you're pathetic," she repeated, stronger now. "You have everything, money, legs, a father who owns this town, and you're still so empty you have to torture a girl in a wheelchair just to feel like a man." The ring went quiet. The phones kept recording. "You think you're a king?" Alyssa continued, a decade of swallowed venom finally spilling free. "You're a coward hiding behind your daddy's checkbook. Your mother's death was a tragedy, but looking at you now, the real tragedy is that she raised a son who turned into this." Gavin's face flushed a violent red. A vein bulged in his neck. The truth had found its mark. He stood up from the wheelchair. He didn't rise. He exploded. "Shut up!" he screamed. He grabbed the chair, battery, frame, all of it, and hurled it across the patio. Metal bent, plastic shattered, sparks spat as it skidded and died against the stone. "You don't talk to me like that," he bellowed, kicking the wreckage. "You're trash. You're nothing." Alyssa stared at the broken chair. It was her way home, her way to move. Panic surged.
She turned and began to crawl, dragging herself across the wet concrete with elbows and forearms, her paralyzed legs trailing behind in the ruined blue dress. Each inch hurt. She aimed for the gate, for the darkness, for anywhere but here. She made it only a few feet before shadows swallowed her. Gavin stepped into her path and blocked the escape as if it were nothing. "Where are you going?" he asked softly, the rage cooling into something worse, focused, deliberate. He lifted his foot and pressed the sole of his heavy sneaker against the side of her head. The pressure increased, forcing her cheek into the gritty concrete. "No," Alyssa whispered. "Please." Gavin leaned his weight down, pinning her there like a specimen. "You wanted to talk about fathers. Let's talk about yours." He pressed harder. "He died in a cage, Alyssa, on his knees, begging, just like you are now." Alyssa cried out. "Your place is beneath my feet," Gavin announced to the crowd, arms spreading as if for applause. "Just like your father, you're the dirt we walk on." Cameras zoomed, flashes popped. The crowd watched and no one moved. Cruelty had become the show. Alyssa closed her eyes. Pool water soaked her dress. Grit scraped her cheek. The weight bore down, stealing breath and dignity together. For the first time since the accident 10 years ago, she wished she hadn't survived it. Then she heard it. At first it was faint, buried beneath laughter and the pounding in her ears. Then it grew, sharp, rising, unmistakably wrong for a neighborhood of manicured lawns and luxury cars. It wasn't the growl of an engine. It was a high-pitched electric whine, a turbine-like shriek, the sound of the future tearing through the night.
Gavin Whitlock frowned, his foot still grinding Alyssa Monroe's head into the concrete. He glanced toward the front of the estate, annoyed that anything dared interrupt this moment of absolute control. The crowd followed his gaze. Phones dipped. The drunken haze cracked. What approached the gates wasn't a car engine. It was displaced air, an electric torque, a high-frequency whine like a jet turbine spooling for takeoff. The sound climbed, sharpened, and then the night split. The wrought-iron gates of the Whitlock estate, 12 feet high, custom-forged, and priced higher than most families' decades, did not open. They dissolved. Metal shrieked and tore apart as a massive angular shape punched through, iron twisting like licorice and flung into manicured hedges. A peacock screamed and fled. The machine didn't slow. It surged up the driveway, a geometric slab of unstoppable force, military tires chewing stone. The pool deck erupted into screams. Cruelty evaporated. Panic arrived cold and instant. This wasn't a party crash. It was an invasion. The driver's door hissed open, and Dorian, the hammer Blackwell, stepped out. The man who emerged was not the quiet neighbor who fixed engines and talked weather. The grease-stained coveralls were gone. The stoop was gone. He stood tall, spine straight as a drawn blade. A bespoke black suit concealed a shoulder holster beneath his left arm, white shirt crisp, tie knotted with surgical precision. But it was his face that ended the night's illusions. The kindly grandfather had vanished. In his place stood a warlord. For years, Oak Creek had known him as the old man in the ranch house. They didn't know that decades earlier, his name had been whispered in Pentagon situation rooms. They didn't know he'd built and commanded private armies, that he'd moved nations like chess pieces before breakfast. They didn't know why he was here. He adjusted his cuffs and took in the scene, the broken wheelchair, the terrified teenagers, the mayor's son standing on a girl's head, and memory flashed like heat lightning. A desert highway, fire, Elias Monroe running into it while others ran out. Elias dragging Dorian through smoke and mud, taking a bullet to the shoulder and refusing to let go. "I'm just a driver, sir," Elias had rasped, "but I've got a little girl back home, Alyssa. If the world ever chews me up, promise me you'll keep her safe." Dorian had promised.
And when Elias died in prison, framed, discarded, Dorian had sold his shares, stepped away from the board, and moved next door to the girl he owed his soul to. He had waited in the shadows, honoring the vow, hoping she could live an ordinary life. Tonight, the shadows were not enough. Dorian walked toward the pool with terrifying, fluid grace. Teenagers scattered, vaulting furniture to clear his path. They felt the violence radiating off him like heat. Gavin stared, his brain refusing the data. He recognized the neighbor, but his instinct screamed predator. Who do you think you are?" Gavin stammered, his foot easing but not lifting. "You're just the neighbor." Dorian didn't stop. He passed the shivering DJ. He passed the weeping girl in the ruined blue dress. He walked until he stood toe-to-toe with the mayor's son. He looked down at Gavin without anger. Anger was human. This was the cold assessment of an exterminator deciding how to end a nest. "I am the man who is going to burn your world to ash," Dorian said, voice low, tectonic. His gaze flicked to the designer sneaker grinding Alyssa's temple. "You have made a grave miscalculation." Gavin tried to summon his arrogance, his father's reach, the police, the money. "Get off my property. You're trespassing." Dorian tilted his head. "Brave words," he said. He took one step closer, and the air seemed to thin. "But you are standing on sacred ground." His voice hardened. "Get your filthy foot off my niece." The command landed like a verdict. Gavin flinched and stepped back. Alyssa gasped as the pressure lifted. She looked up through tears and pool water, past polished shoes and pressed trousers, to the face of the man she thought fixed cars for a living. "Dorian," she whispered. He didn't look at her yet. His eyes stayed on Gavin. "You broke her chair," Dorian said, noting the twisted wreckage. "She fell," Gavin lied, backing toward the pool. "It was an accident." Dorian reached into his jacket and produced black leather gloves. He pulled them on slowly, one finger at a time. The leather stretched, the only sound in the world. "Accidents happen," he said softly. "Retribution is planned." He stepped forward. Gavin hit the pool's edge. There was nowhere left to run. The iron beast had arrived, and it was hungry.
Gavin Whitlock staggered backward until his heels hovered over the edge of the infinity pool. The arrogance he wore like armor cracked and fell away, leaving the naked panic of a boy who finally understood that the adults had arrived. He shrieked that she was dead, his voice splintering, and fumbled in the pocket of his swim trunks for his phone, the latest model, a talisman of inherited power. He threatened to call the chief, to call his father, to have arrests made and lives ruined. His thumbs danced across the screen, then froze. The color drained from his face. No bars, no signal. The spell broke. Dorian, the Hammer Blackwell, stood 5 feet away, unhurried, adjusting the cuff of his jacket with surgical calm. He explained the dead zone without raising his voice, nodding once toward the matte charcoal Cybertruck idling behind him like a patient predator. "A localized military jammer," he said. "Nobody calls in, nobody calls out. For 10 minutes, this backyard did not exist." Across the patio, phones lifted and lowered in confusion. Screens showed nothing. The audience was cut off, the digital umbilical severed. Gavin held his useless phone up like a charm and stammered that he couldn't be touched, that he was a minor, that any contact would be assault. Dorian smiled, thin, mirthless, terrifying, and replied that he had no intention of touching garbage. He snapped 2 fingers. Through the mangled gates, a second vehicle glided in, an unmarked matte black SUV, windowless and ominous. Its doors opened in unison. 4 men stepped out, not mall security, but Aegis Global contractors, charcoal suits stretched over concealed armor. They didn't run, they flowed, silent and coordinated, a wolf pack crossing grass. The teenagers shrank back, fear finally sobering them. Dorian pointed once and ordered them to remove him.
Gavin bolted left. A hand the size of a catcher's mitt clamped his shoulder. He screamed, thrashed, shouted names and threats, demanded recognition. The operative didn't answer. He didn't blink. He seized Gavin by the waistband and the back of the neck and lifted him like a sack. Legs kicked, obscenities spilled. Dorian said the trash goes in the water. The operative swung once, released, and Gavin arced through the air before crashing into the deep end, right where the twisted skeleton of Alyssa Monroe's wheelchair lay submerged. Water exploded, screams choked into bubbles. Dorian didn't wait to watch him surface. He turned away and knelt on the wet concrete beside Alyssa. She was shivering, curled in on herself, blue dress ruined, cheek bleeding. She looked up, stunned. Dorian apologized for being late, his voice betraying a rare fracture. He said he had promised her father he would watch over her, and that he had watched too long. He asked permission. Alyssa nodded, breathless. He gathered her in his arms. She felt impossibly light, fragile as a bird. He rose and carried her toward the Cybertruck. At his command, the rear gull-wing door hissed open. The interior glowed with ambient white light, pristine vegan leather, tactical displays scrolling maps and feeds, the scent of ozone and sterilized air, a violent contrast to the small, gritty world she knew. He laid her gently across the back seat, slipped off his jacket, and wrapped it around her shoulders, hiding the stains. He told her to buckle up. Behind them, Gavin surfaced in the pool, coughing and sputtering, humiliated before his peers, treading water above the wreckage of what he had destroyed. Dorian leaned in, eyes locked on Alyssa's eyes, and told her she was wondering what came next. She whispered about her chair, about getting home. His gaze hardened, fixed on a horizon she couldn't yet see. He told her she wasn't going back to that house. Tonight her life changed, and theirs ended. He shut the door, the lock sealed with the sound of a vault. Dorian walked to the driver's side, climbed in, and the iron beast began to move.
The office of Chief Raymond Kessler was a monument to small-town rot. It smelled of stale cigar smoke, cheap floor wax, and something harder to name. Moral decay soaked into the walls. Venetian blinds sliced the streetlights outside into jagged bars that crawled across a desk buried under yellowed files and forgotten favors. Mayor Sterling Whitlock paced like a caged predator. He was still in his tuxedo from the fundraising dinner, bow tie loosened and hanging, jacket open like a wound. His face burned red, not with shame for what his son had done, but with the incandescent fury of a man who had lost control of the story. Power, to him, was narrative, and tonight the narrative had slipped. Chief Kessler sat behind the desk, thick-set, his neck swelling over his collar. Sweat shone at his temples. He dabbed at it with a handkerchief and spoke in the soft, placating tone he'd perfected over decades. The situation was contained, he said. Deputies were already at the estate, clearing the kids out, calming parents, restoring order. "I don't care about the kids," Whitlock snapped. He slammed his palm onto the desk hard enough to rattle the nameplate. "I care about the phones." Kessler nodded quickly. They were collecting them as evidence, he said, standard procedure after a major disturbance. Parents were being told it was a trespassing investigation. The videos would be scrubbed before the devices were returned. "Scrub everything," Whitlock ordered. "Every pixel. If 1 second of Gavin standing on that girl's head hits TikTok, my campaign is finished. You hear me?" His voice dropped, lethal. "Wipe cloud backups, lean on them, threaten them with underage drinking, possession, whatever sticks. I don't care how you do it. Make it disappear." "Consider it done," Kessler said. He hesitated, shifting in his chair. "But there's a bigger problem, Mayor. The neighbor, Dorian Blackwell." Whitlock stopped pacing. He poured himself a whiskey from the chief's decanter without asking. "What about him?"
He drove through your front gate, destroyed private property, assaulted a minor, took the girl. My guys say the truck wasn't street legal, looked military." Whitlock waved a dismissive hand. "He's a washed-up grease monkey, fixes engines and lawnmowers, probably welded scrap metal onto a pickup and thinks he's a war hero. He threw Gavin into the pool, threatened to end their lives." Whitlock smiled, a thin, satisfied curve of the mouth. "Good." He took a slow sip of whiskey. "That gives us everything." He turned back to the chief, eyes sharp. "We are not charging my son with anything. This gets written up as teenage horseplay that went too far. A prank. No harm, no foul." He jabbed a finger toward Kessler. "But Blackwell? He broke into a private residence, destroyed property, assaulted my son, kidnapped a minor." Kessler slid a folder forward. "I can have a tactical unit at his house in an hour. Aggravated burglary, kidnapping, assault with a deadly weapon. We can hold him without bail." "Do it," Whitlock said instantly. "I want him in a cell tonight. I want him humiliated. I want his face on the front page tomorrow as the deranged lunatic who attacked a birthday party." He walked to the window and looked over the sleeping town he treated like personal property. Streets quiet, lights obedient, judges elected, police loyal, money flowing. He felt secure, invincible. To Whitlock, power was a simple equation of leverage, and he believed he held every chip. He didn't know he wasn't playing poker. He was playing chess against someone who had already taken his queen. "He made a mistake crossing me," Whitlock muttered, his reflection ghosting in the dark glass. "He thinks he's a hero." Chief Kessler lifted his radio. "Dispatch, mobilize tactical, warrant service at 42 Maple Drive, suspect armed and dangerous." Whitlock finished his drink and set the glass down with a heavy thud. He straightened his silk tie, contempt curling his lip. That old man is living in the past. Crush him.
The ranch house on Maple Drive was a lie. The peeling white paint and the overgrown azalea bushes were camouflage, nothing more than a tired skin stretched over a skeleton of reinforced titanium and fiber-optic nerves. When Dorian, the hammer Blackwell, drove the Cybertruck into the garage, the concrete floor didn't hold. It descended. A hydraulic lift carried the vehicle downward, past suburbia and into a 3-story bunker carved beneath the earth. Alyssa Monroe lay on the back seat, wrapped in Dorian's jacket, eyes wide as the world shifted from quiet cul-de-sac to science fiction fortress. Blue light hummed along the walls of the underground bay where server racks breathed in steady pulses of processing power. Dorian opened the door and spoke once, calm and final. "We're secure." 2 women in white scrubs were waiting. They didn't move like ordinary nurses. They moved like combat medics. They lifted Alyssa with practiced care and placed her on a gurney. Dorian followed, issuing orders without raising his voice. Check for concussion, spinal trauma, lacerations, full scan, treat the face immediately. The medical bay looked more advanced than the city hospital. As gravel was cleaned from Alyssa's cheek and cooling gel eased the swelling, she watched Dorian cross to a wall of monitors, the nerve center. 3 young operators in hoodies sat at the console, fingers blurring across mechanical keyboards. These weren't hobbyists. They were Aegis Global cyber warfare specialists. "Status," Dorian said. "Local police seized 24 devices from the estate," the lead operator replied without looking up. "Chief Raymond Kessler is running a localized wipe. Cloud backups deleted, internal drives formatted." Alyssa pushed herself upright, wincing as tape secured her ribs. Panic climbed her throat. "They're destroying the evidence," she said. "They're erasing what he did to me." Dorian turned, a grim smile touching his mouth. "In the analog world, maybe," he said. "In the digital world, nothing is ever deleted. It's only moved." He nodded. "Show her."
A keystroke split the main screen into 20 feeds. Alyssa gasped. The party unfolded from every raised phone, 20 angles of cruelty. She saw herself crawling, crying, pinned beneath a boot. Laughter tore through the audio. Slurred insults rang clear. "We intercepted the packets before they reached the cloud," Dorian explained evenly. "While they were drunk on cruelty, my team cloned their devices. Kessler is wiping empty shells. We have everything." Alyssa's hands shook. "Post it," she said, voice trembling with pain and vengeance. "Everywhere. Let the world see who Gavin Whitlock really is." "No," Dorian said. The word landed like a lock. Alyssa stared. "Why?" He met her gaze. "I promised justice, not a scandal. Scandals blow over. Outrage lasts a day. Their PR teams will spin it, call it out of context, blame AI. We're not here for noise. We are here for checkmate." He turned back to the screens. "Is the dossier ready?" "Compiled and verified," the operator said. "Execute protocol. Ghost in the machine." The clock read 10 p.m. An email draft appeared. No text, just 2 attachments. The first, high-definition footage of the assault. The second, an encrypted file. The second file, Dorian narrated, contained GPS logs of Mayor Sterling Whitlock's car parked at Ms. Victoria Laxbur's condo at 2 a.m. every Tuesday for a year. Texts promising her the principality in exchange for silence on school budget fraud. Bank transfers. Alyssa stared. The teacher who told her she was too sensitive. The mayor who buried her father's truth. One web, thick enough to choke. "Send it," Dorian said. "Direct to their personal emails. Bypass filters. Force read receipts." The operator complied. Dorian leaned toward the mic. "Add a subject line." The cursor blinked. "See you at 8 a.m.?" Across town, in a Riverview condo, Victoria Laxber poured herself a large glass of Pinot Grigio. Silk robe, velvet sofa. The mayor had assured her it was handled. The phone seized, the old man arrested, the problem buried. Her phone chimed. Sender unknown. Subject, "See you at 8 a.m." She tapped. The video played instantly. No buffering, no mercy. Crystal clear footage of Gavin crushing Alyssa's head. Her blood ran cold. She opened the second attachment, a PDF. The first page was a transcript of a text she'd sent Whitlock. "She's persistent. I killed the report." She scrolled. Photos, kisses in a car, a hotel entrance, bank statements, consulting fees traced to a slush fund. The glass slipped from her fingers and shattered, red wine bleating across white rug. Her hands shook. This wasn't a leak. It was an execution of career, reputation, freedom. Her phone buzzed again, a message from the same number. "Sleep well, Victoria. Class is in session tomorrow." She dropped the phone, breath gone, walls closing in. In that moment, she understood the truth she refused to see. The girl she dismissed was protected by something far more dangerous than a mayor, and that monster was coming for breakfast.
First period history was usually a lecture about how human error repeats itself. That morning, Miss Victoria Larkspur was the lesson made flesh. She stood at the whiteboard, her hands shaking so hard the markers squealed against porcelain. She hadn't slept. Somewhere across town, a red wine stain was still bleeding into a white rug. Every buzz of her phone made her flinch as if struck. The subject line from the night before, "See you at 8 a.m., burned behind her eyes. The clock clicked. 8 o'clock arrived. The classroom door opened. It wasn't a tardy student. It wasn't a janitor. Dorian the Hammer Blackwell stepped inside, wearing a charcoal 3-piece suit that cost more than Larkspur's annual salary. He carried no weapon, only a leather portfolio held with the casual menace of a man carrying nuclear codes. He walked to the center of the room and, without raising his voice, cut Larkspur off from her students. The room went silent. They recognized him now, not the neighbor, not the mechanic, but the man who had crushed the mayor's son the night before. "Mr. Blackwell," Larkspur said, her voice cracking as she tried to summon authority that had already fled. She insisted he couldn't be there, that the campus was secure, that she was calling security.
Dorian replied calmly that security worked for him, Aegis Global, and placed the portfolio on her desk. He explained that his company had acquired the municipal bonds backing a district's infrastructure debt months earlier. Technically, he said, he owned the roof over their heads. He was there to inspect his investment. The door opened again, and Principal Lawrence Pembroke hurried in, pale and sweating through his shirt. He had received the dossier before dawn. He knew which way the wind was blowing and had no intention of being uprooted. Larkspur gasped his name, relief flooding her face, and demanded he remove the intruder. Pembroke didn't look at her. He stared at the floor and said he couldn't. When she shrieked why, Dorian tapped the portfolio and answered for him. The principal preferred to keep his pension, he said, and he knew that protecting her would make him a co-conspirator in a federal RICO case. Dorian turned to the class, 30 teenagers wide-eyed, and told them they were taught that history is written by the victors. That was a lie, he said. History is written by the evidence. He placed a small digital recorder on the desk and pressed play. Larkspur's voice filled the room, dismissive, cruel, unmistakable. He's a teenage boy. They play rough. Then another clip. You need to stop being so sensitive, Alyssa. Trying to tear down a golden boy like Gavin won't make your legs work again. The words echoed, naked and undeniable. Faces shifted. Disgust replaced doubt. Larkspur lunged for the device, shouting that it was illegal, that she'd been recorded without consent. Dorian caught her wrist. Not hard, just enough to stop her, and stated coldly that in this state, recording is legal if one party consents. Alyssa Monroe had consented. He released her. She stumbled back, smearing ink across her blouse. She tried to salvage dignity, spitting that cruelty wasn't a crime, that it was poor pedagogy, that you couldn't fire someone for an opinion. Dorian agreed. Then he opened the portfolio and produced a stack of stapled pages. Taking bribes from an elected official to suppress assault reports, he said, was a felony. He read aloud deposits, $5,000 a month into a Cayman account under her maiden name. The source was a shell company registered to Mayor Sterling Whitlock. The memo line read, "Consulting Services." He let the papers fan across the desk, a mosaic of corruption. She had sold a disabled girl's safety for a condo down payment. His voice held no rage, only judgment. Principal Pembroke stepped forward, throat tight, and announced that, effective immediately, Miss Larkspur's employment was terminated and her license flagged for review pending a criminal investigation. She screamed. The mask shattered. She protested her title, her authority. "You're a liability. Get out." She turned on her former masters, wailing that it wasn't her fault, that the mayor made her do it, that he threatened her career if she didn't protect Gavin, that the boy was a monster who ran the school. Phones rose. The legacy she had curated dissolved into mascara and cowardice. Pembroke called security. 2 guards took her by the arms as she screeched about orders and victimhood. Dorian watched without blinking. When the hallway swallowed her screams, the room fell to stunned silence. He picked up his portfolio and looked at the students. Class dismissed. He walked out, leaving the principal to the wreckage. In the corridor, the echoes faded. Dorian adjusting his tie. No joy, just maintenance. A weed removed. He took out his phone and opened a tracking app. A single red dot pulsed to Town Hall. 1 pawn down, he murmured to the empty hallway. Now for the Whitlocks.
Dorian Blackwell's underground office felt less like a workspace and more like a vault. Windowless walls pressed in, lined with physical files instead of screens, maps pinned with red string like exposed veins, all bathed in the harsh white glare of halogen lamps. This wasn't a place for brainstorming or strategy meetings. It was a place for truths that had survived attempted erasure. Alyssa Monroe sat in a leather chair, wrapped in a gray hoodie and sweatpants the medical staff had given her. The bruise on her temple had darkened into a purple constellation, a visible map of violence, but her eyes were steady and awake. She cradled a mug of hot tea, letting the warmth seep into fingers that still remembered the cold of concrete. Across the room, Dorian stood by a steel cabinet, shoulders heavy.
The adrenaline of the night was gone, replaced by the quiet sadness of a man who had carried a secret for far too long. "You asked why I waited," Dorian said at last, his voice rough. "Why I let you suffer for years before I stepped in." He pulled out a thick black binder and placed it on the desk with care. "Digital files can be wiped, servers can be crashed, but paper is patient. Paper remembers." Alyssa's eyes dropped to the label. Case File 89, Corvid Clearwater Highway Incident. Her breath caught. "My father's crash," she whispered. "It wasn't a crash," Dorian said. "It was a crime scene." She opened the binder. Twisted metal filled the first page. Her father's crushed sedan, the Whitlock family's mangled luxury SUV. Memory surged. "I know the story," Alyssa said, tears rising. "My dad fell asleep, drifted, killed Mrs. Whitlock, paralyzed me. He died in prison for it." "That's the story Sterling Whitlock bought for $2 million, Dorian replied. He turned to a series of high-resolution photos taken before the vehicles were cleaned. "Look at the driver's side airbag. Blood spatter, wrong angle, wrong pattern. Now the autopsy. She died from blunt force trauma to the right side of her skull, consistent with hitting the passenger side pillar." "But the report said she was driving," said Alyssa slowly, "that the mayor was in the passenger seat because he'd been drinking." "He had been drinking," Dorian corrected, "but he was driving." He slid out a toxicology report stamped suppressed. Blood alcohol .18, speed 90 miles an hour. He crossed the double yellow and used your father's car as a guardrail. Alyssa's voice trembled. "He killed his wife." "He murdered her," Dorian said, then dragged her body into the driver's seat to save his career. He turned the page again, revealing bank records. When the first officer arrived, Raymond Kessler, back when he was just a deputy, Whitlock made him an offer. They framed your father while he was unconscious, planted whiskey, falsified skid analysis, sent an innocent man to prison to protect a drunk politician. Alyssa stared at a photo of her father, Elias Monroe. She remembered the visitation room, his shaking hands, his tears, his voice swearing he was innocent. She remembered hating him for lying. "He told the truth," she choked, "and I didn't believe him." "Whitlock owned the truth," Dorian said softly, "and Elias died because his spirit broke. He died believing his daughter thought he was a monster." Alyssa slammed the binder shut. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. The shame she had carried for years, the weight of being the killer's daughter, evaporated. In its place, something sharp ignited. Her father was innocent. Gavin Whitlock's father was the killer, and she had been tortured for 10 years for a crime committed by the man who ruled the town. She looked up at Dorian. Her eyes were gone. What remained was no longer fear. "You've had this for 10 years?" "I had pieces. I only secured the toxicology report last week. I needed the final nail. If I'd moved earlier, Whitlock would have buried it deeper." "Is it enough? Enough to destroy him?" "It's enough to put him away for life and to clear your father's name." Alyssa smoothed the binder's cover. "Do it." "We will," Dorian replied, "but the mayor is holding a press conference tomorrow. He plans to announce his re-election campaign. He'll spin the party incident as a trespassing issue." Alyssa turned her wheelchair sharply toward the door. "He won't be announcing anything." Dorian raised an eyebrow. "What do you have in mind?" She glanced at the wall of screens where her humiliation looped silently. "Can your people hijack a live broadcast?" Dorian smiled, not kindly, but with the approval of a general who had finally found a soldier ready for the war. "We can hijack the moon if you want it." "Good. Then we're going to town hall. I want to look him in the eye when his world ends." Oak Creek Town Hall rose in white marble and towering columns, a monument built to suggest permanence, order, and inevitability.
On its front steps, a podium waited beneath patriotic bunting, red and blue fabric rippling in the morning air. Microphones from every major network bristled toward it, hungry. Cameras rolled. History leaned forward. At the center of the stage stood Mayor Sterling Whitlock. He looked every inch the statesman, tanned, composed, smiling with the effortless confidence of a man who had never been told no. He raised both hands, and the crowd of supporters quieted on instinct. This was his element, his territory. "My friends," Whitlock boomed, voice echoing across the plaza, "they'd try to smear us with rumors. They'd try to attack my family with lies. But we know the truth. We stand for law and order. We stand for family values." He paused, waiting for applause. What he got was sirens, not from the street, from the perimeter. Unmarked black vans screamed to a halt at the base of the steps, metal doors sliding open in perfect coordination, boxing in the mayor's limousine. The crowd gasped. Whitlock squinted, irritation flashing as he shaded his eyes. "What is this?" he snapped. "Chief Kessler, get these vehicles moved." Chief Raymond Kessler did not answer. 3 blocks away, he was being pushed into the back of a patrol car. A figure climbed the marble steps. Dorian Blackwell moved with calm precision, flanked not by local deputies but by agents in windbreakers stamped with 3 yellow letters that silenced the plaza instantly. FBI. The crowd froze. Camera swung. This was live now, unstoppable. Whitlock gripped the podium. "Blackwell, you're trespassing," he barked. "I will have you arrested for harassment." Dorian stopped 10 feet away and raised a thick manila envelope. Not a lawsuit, an indictment. "I'm not suing you, Sterling," Dorian said, his voice carried cleanly by the microphones. "Civil court is for disputes. This is a federal takedown." A tall woman stepped forward, badge catching the light. Special Agent Mariah Sloan announced, "Sterling Whitlock, you are under arrest for vehicular manslaughter, obstruction of justice, wire fraud, and conspiracy to deprive civil rights." Whitlock laughed, a brittle, desperate sound as the color drained from his face. "You're insane! My wife died in an accident. That mechanic killed her." "We have the toxicology," Dorian said evenly, "and the bank records proving you paid Chief Kessler $2 million to frame Elias Monroe. The game is over." He nodded once. "Freeze it all." Whitlock blinked. "Freeze what?" "Everything," Dorian replied. "Offshore accounts, shell companies, trust funds, campaign chest. 5 minutes ago, the Department of Justice froze every asset tied to the Whitlock name under RICO." He leaned in slightly. "You are bankrupt." Whitlock lunged with a raw animal snarl. "You ruined me!" 2 agents tackled him, driving the mayor of Oak Creek face first into the red, white, and blue bunting. Handcuffs snapped shut louder than any speech he had ever given. Dorian looked down at the man who had destroyed a family and felt nothing. "I didn't ruin you," he said quietly. "I just turned on the lights." At the same moment, the lunch bell rang at McKinley High. Gavin Whitlock walked into the cafeteria with his usual swagger, head high, expecting fear to part the room. He hadn't checked the news. He assumed his father had fixed everything. The atmosphere was wrong. It wasn't quiet. It was buzzing. Every student stared at their phones. Gavin frowned and strode to his usual table. "Move," he snapped at a linebacker. The linebacker didn't move. He slid his tray away and looked at Gavin with something new, disgust mixed with pity. "What's your problem?" Gavin snarled. "Check your phone," the linebacker said softly. Gavin pulled it out. 1 notification. He tapped. The screen filled with a split-screen montage. On one side, Gavin crushing Alyssa Monroe beneath his boot, laughing. On the other, his father being slammed into handcuffs on the steps of Town Hall. Caption, "Like father, like son." The video ended with a document, "Assets frozen, Whitlock family insolvent." Gavin's hands began to shake. A laugh broke out. Then another. "Hey, Gavin," a voice called from the back, a kid he'd stuffed into a rocker last week. "Is it true your dad's broke? Can I borrow $5, or is that too much now?" "Murderer's kid," someone shouted. "Bully." The cafeteria erupted. This time they weren't laughing with him, they were laughing at him. The fear that had shielded him evaporated the moment the money disappeared. Without his father's power, Gavin was just a cruel boy in a varsity jacket he could no longer afford. His friends turned away. The cheerleaders ignored him. He was radioactive. Gavin backed up, tripped over a backpack, and fell. No one helped him. For the first time in his life, he felt the crushing weight of isolation. Across the room, the table where Alyssa used to sit stood empty. She was gone, safe, but her absence haunted him. Gavin scrambled to his feet and ran, bursting through the double doors, fleeing the laughter that chased him down the hall, the sound of an empire collapsing brick by brick.
The Whitlock estate was no longer a fortress. It was a crime scene. Yellow federal tape slashed across the shattered iron gates where the armored truck had torn through the perimeter, fluttering in the evening breeze like a warning flag no one could ignore. FBI agents swarmed the grounds with methodical purpose, carrying out boxes of documents, hard drives, framed art ripped from the walls. The illusion of untouchable wealth was being dismantled piece by piece. Gavin Whitlock ran up the long driveway, lungs burning, legs heavy with canic. He had fled the school, fled the laughter and the stares, only to find his sanctuary violated. He skidded to a halt near the fountain just as two agents escorted his father toward a black SUV. Mayor Sterling Whitlock looked nothing like the man from the podium. His tie was gone. His suit was wrinkled and pulled crooked from the tackle on the town hall steps. His face was tight, eyes sharp, calculating even now. "Dad!" Gavin shouted, sprinting forward, desperation clawing at his throat. "You have to stop this! They froze my cards! Everyone is laughing at me!" Sterling looked up as his son ran toward him, and for a split second, Gavin expected the familiar reassurance, the barked order, the phone call, the miracle check that fixed everything. Instead, he saw something colder. Opportunity. "Officer!" Sterling shouted, suddenly jerking his chin toward Gavin. "That's him! That's my son!" Gavin froze mid-step. "Dad?" Sterling's voice echoed off the stone facade. "I'm a public servant. My son is troubled. Violent tendencies. I tried to get him help. He refused. The bullying, the assault, it was all him. I'm a victim of his recklessness." The words hit Gavin harder than any fist. He stared at the man he had worshipped, imitated, obeyed. "You told me to do it," he whispered, shaking. "You said she was a mistake. You told me to handle her." Sterling sneered. "Liar! He's a pathological liar. Check his school records. I wash my hands of him." An agent shoved Sterling into the SUV. The door slammed shut, final and absolute, severing the bond between father and son. The convoy pulled away, leaving Gavin alone on the driveway of a house he was no longer allowed to enter. He was 18, homeless, bankrupt. The sermons he'd grown up on rang hollow in his head. For the first time in his life, there was no safety net. 2 hours later, the sun dipped low over Centennial Park. Alyssa Monroe sat near the duck pond, the water catching the gold of late afternoon. She wasn't in the battered manual chair Gavin had destroyed. She sat in a sleek titanium electric chair, custom-built, humming with quiet power. The breeze brushed her face. The world felt open again. "Alyssa," the voice was ragged. She turned. Gavin Whitlock stood on the path, a ghost of the boy who had stood on her head the night before. His designer clothes were stained with sweat and dirt, hair matting, eyes hollow and holland. He walked toward her without swagger, limping under the weight of his collapse. "I have nowhere to go," he choked. "They locked the house. My friends won't answer." Alyssa looked at him and felt nothing. The fear was gone. The anger had burned out, leaving only cold clarity. "That's not my problem," she said. Gavin dropped to his knees, a grotesque echo of the night before, only now he was the one on the ground. "Please," he begged, stopping short of touching her. "You have to help me. The police are looking for me. If I get a record, I lose everything. USC, my future." "I lost your future when you chose to destroy mine," Alyssa replied. "I was just doing what my dad wanted," he sobbed. "He made me this way. He threw me under the bus. I'm a victim too." Alyssa rolled forward, the chair's motor humming until she loomed over him. "Don't you dare compare us," she said, low and steady. "My father died in a cage to protect me. Yours sold you out to save himself." "I can change. I'll tell the truth." Alyssa studied his face, the face that had haunted her nightmares for years. "I don't despise you because you were rich," Alyssa said quietly. "I despise you because you had a choice. Every day you chose cruelty." Sirens cut the air.
Blue and red lights flashed through the trees as 2 state trooper cars rolled onto the grass. "Gavin Whitlock," an officer shouted. "Hands in the air." Gavin scrambled back, panicking. "She forgave me," he pleaded. Alyssa met the officer's eyes, then looked back at him. "I forgive nothing." They took him down hard, cuffing him like any other suspect. "You're under arrest for aggravated assault, battery, and hate crime," the officer recited. Gavin screamed apologies as they shoved him into the cruiser, face pressed to the glass, watching Alyssa grow smaller as they drove away. She watched the car disappear and breathed in deeply. The air tasted clean, like justice. She turned her chair. Dorian Blackwell waited by the armored truck at the curb. He nodded once. Alyssa smiled, pushed the joystick forward, and rolled on without looking back.
The federal courthouse in the state capitol had been engineered to withstand explosions, riots, and the fury of men who believed themselves untouchable. When the verdict was read, the building seemed to tremble anyway, not from force, but from consequence. In courtroom 4B, silence pressed down like gravity as Mayor Sterling Whitlock stood before the bench. The tailored suits and polished confidence were gone, replaced by an orange jumpsuit that hung awkwardly on his frame, draining the color from his face and reducing the former ruler of Oak Creek to what he had always been beneath the money, a frightened man cornered by truth. The judge's voice cut cleanly through the chamber, calm and merciless. She spoke without flourish because none was needed. She named the crimes for what they were: the murder of a wife to preserve a career, the framing of an innocent man to protect power, the slow poisoning of an entire town. Whitlock gripped the table as if it might anchor him to the world he was losing, his knuckles bleaching white as each count landed. Vehicular manslaughter, guilty. Wire fraud, guilty. Deprivation of civil rights, guilty. When the gavel fell, it sounded less like a bang than a final door slamming shut. Life imprisonment, no parole, no appeal to legacy or influence. The judge offered mercy to God, and none from the court. Whitlock did not shout a protest. He simply folded inward as the marshals took him by the arms, his body collapsing under a weight money could no longer lift. As he was led away, he searched the gallery for loyalty, for rescue. There was none, only Dorian the Hammer Blackwell, watching with eyes like cold flint, unmoved by the fall of a man who had mistaken control for invincibility. 3 miles away, justice took a quieter but no less final form. In a juvenile courtroom stripped of ceremony, Gavin Whitlock sat alone. There were no elite attorneys flanking him, no whispered strategies. Frozen assets had left him with a weary public defender and the unblinking stare of video evidence. The magistrate did not entertain excuses. What had been done was not mischief, it was cruelty, it was sadism. Gavin's sobs were small and broken, the sound of someone meeting himself for the first time without armor. He was remanded to Red Rock Secure Juvenile Facility until his 21st birthday, ordered into mandatory psychiatric evaluation and rehabilitation, formally declared a danger to others. As the cuffs closed and he was led through heavy steel doors, the last remnants of privilege fell away. Inside that place, his last name would buy nothing. Strength would be tested by boys far hungrier than he had ever been. Elsewhere, beneath the buzzing lights of a discount supermarket, Consequence wore a cheaper uniform. Miss Victoria Larkspur sat on a stool at Register 4, dressed in a blue polyester vest that smelled faintly of onions and disinfectant. Her hair showed gray at the roots now, the careful image of authority long eroded. A customer snapped at her to hurry. She did. She always did. When the television in the corner flashed breaking news, former mayor sentenced to life, her hands froze mid-scan. A voice behind her squinted at the screen, recognition dawning. "Weren't you that teacher?" Victoria looked down.
shame burning hotter than any public sentence. She whispered denial she no longer believed. She was technically free, but freedom meant little. She would live inside a quieter prison, social exile, whispered recognition, a life defined by what she had chosen to ignore. The final reckoning came in the quietest place of all. At Oak Creek Cemetery, light rain fell softly, turning the air cool and clean. Elissa Monroe sat in her new wheelchair, the hum of its motor barely audible beneath the hush of the grounds. Dorian Blackwell stood behind her, holding a black umbrella steady against the drizzle. Before them stood a polished granite headstone, paid for by assets seized from the Whitlock Empire, bearing a name once buried under lies. Elias Monroe, father, hero, innocent. Elissa said as the light rain softened sounds. "They cleared him," she whispered, her fingers resting on the cold stone. The governor's posthumous pardon had been issued that morning. The truth, long strangled, had finally been spoken aloud. Dorian's voice was low and steady as he answered. Elias had not drifted, he had been pushed, and he had stood his ground to the end. Elissa wiped a tear from her cheek, not grief but release. The shame she had carried for a decade, the lie that had wrapped itself around her identity, was gone. Her father could rest, and so finally could she. Dorian nodded once, a man finishing a long war. Justice had been slow, it had been methodical, but it had arrived.
The sun hung high over the McKinley High football stadium, but this time its light did not burn with the old heat of fear or silence. It fell warm and steady, a gold wash over packed bleachers filled with parents, teachers, and students fanning themselves with folded programs. On the stage, faculty members sat in black robes, their posture formal, but their faces softened by anticipation. When the new principal, hired to replace years of rot, stepped to the podium, the crowd settled into a hush that felt earned. He smiled, cleared his throat, and spoke with a pride that carried. It was his distinct honor, he said, to introduce a valedictorian who had taught the school more about resilience than any curriculum ever could, Miss Elissa Monroe. The applause that followed was not polite, it was thunder. Elissa rolled her sleek titanium wheelchair to center stage, the crimson gown falling cleanly over her knees, the gold sash of the Honor Society bright against her chest. She adjusted the microphone and looked out across a sea of faces, faces that had once watched her pain without moving. She felt no hatred for them now. She had outgrown that place inside herself. They had asked her to speak about the future, she began, her voice calm and sure. But a future could not be built on lies. The words landed and stayed. For a long time, she said, she believed her worth was measured by what she had lost, her legs, her father, her voice. She believed dignity was something granted by the powerful. She paused and glanced toward the back of the stadium where the ghost of Gavin Whitlock no longer haunted the track. Dignity, she learned, was not a gift, it was a weapon. It was the refusal to break when the world tried to bend you. It was the courage to speak the truth when lies were louder. We are not defined by the scars we carry, she said, but by the battles we fight to heal them. Her smile was radiant and unguarded. Her father, Elias Monroe, had been an innocent man, she told them, and he taught her to stand tall, even when she had to sit. Today, she wasn't just graduating, she was rising. The stadium erupted, caps flew, the sound was deafening. In the front row, Dorian the Hammer Blackwell rose to his feet. He wore a simple gray suit, Sunday clean, and clapped slowly, a rare softness breaking across his weathered face. He did not look like a warlord or a titan of industry. He looked like a grandfather watching a legacy take flight. An hour later, the parking lot thinned as families drifted away. Elissa rolled down the ramp with her diploma clutched tight, the paper warm in her hands. Dorian waited by the curb.
Behind him, the Cybertruck gleamed in the afternoon sun. A year ago, it had been a monster, an iron force that smashed gates and crushed illusions. Today, it looked different. It looked like shelter. It looked like safety. "Ready to go, kid?" he asked, opening the heavy passenger door. Alyssa paused and looked back at the school one last time. The memories were still there, but they no longer hurt. They were history. "Where are we going?" she asked. Dorian smiled. "Anywhere you want. Stanford is waiting. The world is waiting." Alyssa nodded and rolled up the ramp into the truck, eyes forward now, toward open road and open sky. The door hissed shut. The electric engine hummed to life, quiet, powerful, and the iron beast pulled away, leaving behind a town that had learned a hard lesson. The bullies were gone, the corrupt were in chains, and the girl in the wheelchair was leading the way. Evil can be loud, screaming for attention and power. Justice is not. Justice is patient. It is silent. It is unbreakable as steel. From the crushing weight of a boot on concrete to the freedom of an open road, Alyssa Monroe's journey proves the human spirit can outlast any cruelty. Power built on money and violence always believes itself untouchable. It never is. In the end, it was the quiet accumulation of truth, old paper files, steady resolve, and the heart of a grieving man that brought an empire down. Dorian the Hammer Blackwell did not save Alyssa by carrying her. He saved her by standing beside her until she could rise on her own. Family, she learned, is not always blood. It is the people who stay when the world turns away. The image of iron tearing through gates was never just a rescue. It was a reckoning, a reminder that even when you're crawling in the dark, justice is waiting. Evil shouts, truth waits, and in the end, truth always arrives.